That's why they have that Class 3 designation. It is in place to identify that as this is not usable. And it's not where anybody gets any kind of drinking water from. As we've covered a couple of times, those are not 30 or 40 feet deep below ground surface. Those are more like 800 to 1,000 or better feet below ground surface. The MSD application was initially submitted to the city of San Antonio in 2019. Since we initiated this in 2016, the investigation process, we've gone through 6 rounds of groundwater monitoring in order to evaluate plume stability and delineation to make sure we have a really good handle on exactly where this stuff is in the groundwater and what it's doing. And then, as Robert indicated, the MSD is a tool to help address the groundwater impacts, the TCE impacts in groundwater in this very limited area. That's really the only thing that the MSD accomplishes from the standpoint of all the things we have to do to get this thing through regulatory closure. The TCEQ has 6, 7, 8 different exposure pathways and variations of things that have to be assessed, at least. The MSD dealing with the groundwater impacts and specifically eliminating that from potential groundwater ingestion is just one of those 6 or 8 different exposure pathway items. So there's a lot of other things that are going on in addition to the MSD that are being done under the jurisdiction and the watchful eye of the TCEQ. So, soil and groundwater contamination concentrations are below non-ingestion exposure pathway. Non-ingestion exposure pathway. That basically means we've already established that this groundwater unit is not suitable for drinking. It's not suitable to use for anybody to drill a well, tap into, and use as a drinking water resource. So if you take drinking water, if you take the possibility of somebody drinking this water off the table, then you've eliminated that one potential exposure pathway, but there's still all the others. Well, the concentrations of everything we've assessed on this site are all below everything outside of using this water to drink. And those are just some of the listed exposure pathways. They include soil, groundwater, vapor, and multiple different exposure pathways within each of those media. Again, there were no regulatory limit exceedances in soil. Contaminant concentrations in soil and groundwater do not exceed established TCEQ concentration levels for protection of human health or vapor intrusion. It's just another way of saying what I just said a couple of slides ago. These concentrations reported on this property are below all exposure pathways and regulatory limits, with the exception of somebody trying to use this particular groundwater bearing unit to drink. There's no exposure pathways to surface water. This stuff doesn't have any ties or links to any surface water. No creeks, no streams, no rivers, no ponds, none of that stuff. It's deep enough and it's stable enough that it's not moving. It's going to sit right where it is right now until Mother Nature takes care of it and naturally attenuates and goes away on its own. The impacts of groundwater are delineated both horizontally and vertically. Like I said before, with 9 permanent monitor wells, 4 off-site permanent monitor wells, 11 temporary monitor wells. We've established a gradient inside the movement, the direction the groundwater moves, although very, very, very slow, is generally to the north and northwest. And the plume is stable and in most respects decreasing in size and concentration. And that's based on a number of groundwater sampling events, statistical models that are run, and we know that it's not going to get any worse. It's not going to grow. It's not going to increase in concentration because all of the sources of the contamination on the property have been removed. They're gone. There's nothing feeding this thing anymore for it to get any bigger or for it to move or increase in concentration. So where it is now is as bad as it's going to get. and it's just going to get better. Where it is tomorrow will be a little less than it is today, and that's as bad as it's going to get moving forward. And I think all the rest of it basically say the same thing. We've got a lot of data to support all this. We've got a lot of laboratory analysis. Tons of samples have been taken from 2016 to 2020. And all of this is very well documented and established. Has been submitted not only to the city for their review, the TCEQ for their review, and there were a few questions here and there. We've addressed them all. I would say that everybody's generally in agreement or on board, or we wouldn't be here right now at this point in the process. So this is a very busy slide. Again, the yellow is the site boundary, the red is the MSD boundary. I think the two main takeaways on this are the purple, that is the groundwater plume, the groundwater contamination, the extent of the impacts that we've been talking about all along. They're very isolated, they're very limited. They're almost completely limited to the site, except they just barely extend beyond the property boundary and just barely clip the right-of-way of Broadway Street, which is why the MSD boundary is being extended to include that portion of Broadway right-of-way. So this is the extent of the contamination in groundwater underlying this property. So this is the area right here where we need to make sure that nobody attempts to try to sink a well and set up some kind of drinking water process from it. We've already established that the TCEQs agree that this groundwater burning unit is horrible, not useful for drinking in the first place. Not to mention the fact the city of San Antonio supplies water to this site and at least everywhere within a 5-mile radius. So there would be no reason to do that. But the MSD, what it's going to do is it's through a city ordinance, is it's going to put an institutional control, a legal requirement that's enforceable on property that says within that boundary, you can't access that groundwater and try to drink it. So it's kind of belt and suspenders and whatever else beyond that. It's like 3 or 4 layers of protection at this point. I guess the other thing to take away is all these little symbols here, and all these text boxes, that's all, well, it's not all the data by any means. That's just a summary of the groundwater data that we've collected over the period of time that we've been doing that we've been doing this investigation. There's a lot of data from this site to make sure that we've got this thing very well assessed. And we got our arms around it, we know what's going on. Like I said before, groundwater gradient is generally to the north-northwest. That's the direction that the natural groundwater at that 30 to 40 foot level tends to flow. But it's very, very slow. As part of all this process, obviously, we need to look at all of the water wells that do exist that are surrounding the site. Although the likelihood of any of this getting in a water well, even if there was a water well immediately next door, is very, very low because, again, we're 30 to 40 feet. Water wells are at 800 to 1,000 plus feet. But we still have to evaluate it to make sure. It's not only a requirement from the city, but it's a requirement from the TCEQ. They require us, as part of that submittal, as a separate independent report that evaluates groundwater or water wells in the vicinity. So this is just a snapshot of a 5-mile radius, a 5-mile radius, and all the water wells that are reported or known to exist within a 5-mile radius. Basically, in this case, I believe the closest water well to our property in this site is, I think, 800 or 900 feet away, and it's screened at 800 or 900 feet below grade. So it's 900 feet away. It's 850, 900 feet deeper than what our groundwater unit is. And if we go back, let me see if I can go back. Oh, I'm pushing the wrong thing. No. So this gradient is generally running to the north-northwest. These closest water wells are actually south-southwest. They're down here somewhere. So not only are they far away, Not only are they far deeper, but they're almost in an opposite, or at least perpendicular direction to the direction that the groundwater is flowing. So if this stuff were going to move, which we've already established that it's not, it wouldn't be moving in that direction, it would be moving in an opposite direction. So basically, the bottom line is, there's no water wells anywhere close to this that this could potentially impact, and we've documented and established that very thoroughly. Okay, so in summary, it's almost over. The site, approximately 2.15 acres, located at 420 Broadway. Source of contamination is historic, and what was causing that to originally occur has all been removed from the property, and so there's no longer a contributing or continuing source of contaminants on the property. No regulatory exceedances in soil. Contaminant concentrations in groundwater are protected with all non-ingestion exposure pathways. The only thing we're exceeding is if someone tried to drink it. The on-site source plume has been delineated, and it's been delineated, established to be stable or declining, and it doesn't threaten any drinking water or surface water resources. Concentrations are stable. And in addition to the fact that we've established that they're stable, they are going to continue to decrease over time. Mother Nature will take care of it in time. The regulatory closure will ensure that there is a continued beneficial use of this property, which I think Robert covered in his presentation, which is one of the processes, one of the reasons the state set this program up, and the city has identified it as a useful tool, is it helps bring otherwise contaminated. This one isn't a real good model because it's so slightly contaminated. There's a lot of other properties out there that are so contaminated they would never be redeveloped if there weren't ways to kind of help work through this process. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. I will just very, very quickly touch on, okay, so where do we go from here? Well, Robert already covered what is going to happen from the standpoint of the city. It's got to go through the city council, it's got to go through public hearing. There's a few other steps the city's going to do before they're in the process, before they're to a point where they've decided, okay, they're going to adopt this ordinance. So once that happens, beyond just the city's involvement, then we've got to take this entire thing with the ordinance, and we've got to go to the TCEQ, and we've got another couple of steps that we've got to go through with the TCEQ, where they do yet another review to make sure from a technical standpoint, from a contamination standpoint, from the assessment standpoint, from the procedural and legal standpoints for the rules regulations that set up the MSD, that we have completely and effectively complied with every single one of those. And then once we get through that step, the TCEQ will finally certify the MSD, and at that point, we're very near being done. A few more steps after that, but for all intents and purposes, at that point, we're nearly done. So, I guess the point to leave you with respect to that is, this has got a lot of eyes at a lot of different levels, and multiple levels of redundant review and approvals and scrutiny. This process is set up where I think it would be nearly impossible for something to fall through the cracks. It's very, very, very well hashed out and scrutinized. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn it back over to, I guess, Robert, and he will, I guess, kind of direct it from here on out.
Sure. I guess at this time, what we'd like to do is just accept questions from you guys, and of course from anybody that's tuned in, if there's anybody there. If you have any questions.
I have a couple.
Sure.
My name's Kirk Tracy. I'm with Paladin Law Group. We've got an office space within the notice area, although not super close. And coincidentally, we deal almost exclusively with contaminated properties, especially with fluorinated solvents. So, kind of just interested in some of the data.
when they initially turned in the application, there was supplemental reports that we requested. I think there was 3 or 4 rounds that were requested.
Four. There were four. Four supplemental submittals with additional information.
They have-
Clarification.
So they haven't been posted on the website. I need to do that because you're right. A lot of this information was older. That was the whole reason it took a little bit longer. We requested additional information. We got it. It just hasn't been posted yet.
So is monitoring well number 8, is that a new well, a relatively new well? Has that only been sampled recently? Because I don't recall seeing that in the application, and that's sort of northeast and kind of closes a gap where there's other wells to the, northwest, right? So there's other wells to the northwest that are a block away, and that looks like monitoring well 8 kind of closes that gap. Is that?
Yes, and you're absolutely correct. Monitor well 8 was one of, if not the last, it's been, I think it's been a couple years, but was one of the last, if not the last monitor well that was put in. I don't remember exactly how many times it was sampled. Yeah, that was part of the supplemental submittals or subsequent submittals that were done basically at the request of the city to kind of tighten up that delineation. So yeah, that information was not in the original submittal, but is included in the supplementals.
Okay. And then related to that, I suppose, the application has different slides at different periods of time with groundwater gradient fluctuating over 90 degrees difference.
Right.
And I'm hearing you stating with confidence that it's pretty certain it's predominantly north-northwest.
Mm-hmm.
What's the basis for that confidence with the historical data showing it going all different directions?
So groundwater flow can fluctuate. I mean, that's obviously very possible. Those initial ones, if I remember correctly, I think they were based on 3 wells or 4 wells. And as we got more wells installed and we broadened our monitor well network, then every time we were gauging and we were doing the measurements, it was more consistently going north-northwest, and we felt like that was definitely far more representative with a broader monitor well network with more data points than the ones that were initially done with fewer.
Okay. I was wondering also, you mentioned essentially the assessment is that there aren't any vapor intrusion issues at this site or vapor issues at this site. But I'm hearing that the MSD program is really focused on groundwater. So is all that vapor intrusion concern, is that something that on which TCEQ is signing off on that assessment?
Well, actually, I would say, I don't want to speak on behalf of the city, but I'll just speak from my perspective. The MSD application, which is the city's, does require us to, there is a section, let me put it that way, there is a section in there about
the city guide mentions inhalation of vapors as a concern.
Yes.
Go ahead, continue, sorry.
So there is a section in the MSD application where they request that we address the potential concern for vapor. So because of that, I would say that, no, it's not just a TCEQ review when it comes to vapor, but I assume the city asked for it because they want to see it, they look at it also. So from my perspective, it appears, as best as I can determine, that both entities are looking at and reviewing potential vapor concerns in the data that we're submitting for that, both the city and the TCEQ.
Okay. And then I think maybe just one last question.
Sure.
So the application, understanding it's 2 years old or 3 years old, it lists only TCE, so trichloroethylene as the contaminant of the site. And I'm seeing at least a couple samples, maybe just one sample of PCE, so tetrachloroethylene, which is a parent compound, so it couldn't be a byproduct. It'd have to be some other source, or at other sites, the PCE be the big plume of PCE and then a breakdown product, as I'm sure you know. I also saw samples of petroleum hydrocarbons or BTEX compounds. What's sort of the driver for listing TCE as the only thing in the application, and how does that impact decision making in the application if there is, even if it's a one-off hit of PCE? does that change the application process? So I guess it's a two-part question. It's what drives that to be the only contaminant listed at the top of the application? And then how does that filter down the rest of the application?
Okay. The reason that is the only compound that's listed in the application is because it's the only one that exceeded a regulatory limit. I'm not sure completely how does it filter down through the rest of the application.
Well, there's decision-making steps on what to represent, fill in the application. So and maybe it's a question Robert might have thoughts on, or maybe nobody has a good answer to it right now. But, if you only list one contaminant, then whoever's reviewing the application might overlook other contaminants. So maybe that's more of a procedural question that wouldn't necessarily be your field.
Well, I can speak to from the standpoint of, I guess, how we put the application together and our thought process going through that. I don't remember specifically or exactly what the application page looked like, but my assumption is it asked what is the contaminant of concern, and there was only one, so we listed TCE. We did provide the city with all of our data for the assessment of the site. So there was nothing that was I guess overlooked on our part or expected to be. It was all provided, and it goes all the way back to what drove the assessment. Well, it was the different source areas, and we investigated every potential source area and ran all of the possible contaminant compounds that we felt like were reasonable to come from there. That's why we have a full list of VOCs. That's why we have P-tanks, because there were fuel tanks on the site at one point. That's why we have TDH, and I know we ran metals and all these other different things. Well, effectively, TCE is the one thing that really rose to the surface as being over a regulatory limit. That passed through with the TCEQ through the APAR, and so that's what we really ended up focusing on in the MSD application. I don't know if that really answers your question, or if I'm really just kind of throwing the issue here.
It makes sense.
Okay.
I mean, it makes sense. I find it, maybe I'm less worried about you guys have provided all the data to the city, which it sounds like you have. I'm just really curious if there was a weird soil gas hit of PCE right in that northern corner, and it shows up nowhere else. Maybe I find it interesting, but you're saying that all the data everywhere shows everything below regulatory levels except for the things specifically mentioned in the application.
Right. Soil, vapor, groundwater, with the exception of TCE and groundwater. And that's not to say there weren't things detected. I mean, there were definitely things detected. And there were a lot of different historical sources as we discussed. I mean, and all of those things could have dropped a little bit something here and there. But if they're not above a regulatory limit, and keep in mind, I don't know that I actually even said this, but we're pursuing residential closure on this property. It's commercial industrial, or non-residential use now and for the foreseeable future. But we're going for a residential closure on this property, so that actually takes it to a level that's even more stringent than what would be necessary to satisfy the current use of the property for commercial industrial. So nothing else was above a residential limit, which according to the state and everybody else, EPA and everybody else who looks at this stuff, you can build a house on top of this stuff, except for the TCE and groundwater, and it's not actual, nothing needs to be done. So that's why it really wasn't focused on in the MSD application, or for that matter, all of this is also equally presented in the APAR that goes to the TCEQ, and all the same data is laid out in front of the TCEQ, but it still boils down to TCE is the thing that is the only thing that exceeds the regulatory limit, and that's a residential limit, regulatory limit. So again, I'm getting the sense I'm really not answering your question, so maybe I'm just going to talk and let you keep asking until I get
Sorry. That's all right. I think I've got it.
All right.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Okay, yeah. explanation. I guess I was hoping volume would cover the issue.
I got a question. My name is Adam Reed. I'm with Ford Powell and Carson Architects. We're the architect of the property, recent development, but also the tenant, the only tenant on the property right now in the historic lot building. Are the monitoring wells still in place, or were they removed after? Like, you're not still testing, are you?
No, we're not currently testing. It's a bit of a floating question. Some of the monitor wells are in place. We did not intentionally go in and remove or plug and abandon any of the monitor wells because we wouldn't have any intention of doing that until after we got the site like closed through even the TCQ. Post the city issuing an MSD if they do, and then the TCQ closure. Then we'll plug and abandon all the monitor wells just to be safe. Some of the monitor wells are no longer there, which was an artifact of the construction activities. I feel highly confident that they really tried. But I can only imagine what a difficult process it is given the construction activities to avoid a monitor well. We've lost a few, I think.
And then lost some probably also with the Broadway improvements projects that are,
Well,
there's one or two that are out there offsite. Is that?
I don't know. There's only one off-site, and that's obviously 8 up there in Broadway. I don't know. I know the last time we sampled it, obviously it was there.
Okay.
I don't know that we've actually gone out and looked for it since, what's that date? 2020? January 2020? So I don't know that we've actually gone out there and looked for it since then. Maybe it's gone. I don't know.
Well, my only concern, the reason I'm asking is we're parking that parking lot. I wanted to know what this process may have impact on us, if there's additional monitoring that needs to be done, or because of the parking lot construction that was done to cover up a lot of these wells, are y'all going to be having to get in there to dig additional wells in the future, and would that have an impact on us, you know, on the property? That's my concern.
I think, okay, does the potential exist? I would have to say, yeah. It does exist, but I think the likelihood is very low.
Okay.
Typically in these situations, on these kind of sites, when they're at this stage of the game, it's usually rare that we need to go back and do any more sampling. But we leave the wells there just in case. Just in case the city wants another round, or in case the state decides they want another round or something like that. It usually doesn't happen. So the likelihood of us having to do that is really low. But if we had to, yeah, we'll come back out looking for those wells to try to sample them. If they've been covered up or they're gone or they no longer exist, it's highly unlikely, but worst case scenario is someone may require us to go install another well.
Yeah.
But again, I think in the nearly 30 years I've been doing this, I think I've actually had to go out and do that once. So very slim odds. So I think you guys are probably pretty safe from having your parking lot and other processes horribly disrupted.
Any other questions? Joe, do we have any questions from anybody out there? No, you're good. Okay. As far as the additional process, we're still waiting on a letter of resolution support from SAS. We have been told that they are backing it, but we're still waiting on that letter. I was trying to remember if there was anyone else other than SAS.
Yeah, we're talking for Dory, and we're coordinating with them.
I think they're lacking as well. Oh, no, we actually received their letter.
I do have much coordination.
Just want to remind y'all, if y'all think of anything else, y'all have that 10-day period. Please contact me, email me with any additional questions, and I'll make sure I get back with you.
And if anybody's got horrible insomnia, just request a video of this presentation. Problem solved.
And I just wanted to remind y'all, Robert had mentioned the Community Health, Environment, and Culture Committee. We're trying to get that scheduled for November. Right now, if you look at the city website, there's not a set date. time frame for us to get on the agenda. I noticed everybody had signed in, so as soon as we know that it's scheduled, we will email you. That's another opportunity for y'all to go and provide comments. So all the comments that y'all have noted here, those will be shared with the committee. And so that'll be another opportunity to provide comments. And then once that is complete, we're hoping in December that we can take this to City Council for consideration and approval. As part of that item, there'll be an opportunity for a public hearing there to provide other comments for the entire City Council to consider before they vote. And so one of the other things too, as Robert had mentioned, so once the city passes the MSD ordinance, then at that point, ESC will have to go before SAWS's board to request a resolution of support, which they also need in order to go to the TCQ to provide the ordinance, the resolution of support, and work directly with the TCQ. And I think once it goes to the TCQ, correct me if I'm wrong, these folks are also going to get another letter. I think that's the process that TCQ also has.
TCQ requires either documentation of a successful delivery of the notifications that clearly you guys got. So no, there won't be another one.
Okay.
But for all the people that we don't have proof that got it, we have to try 3 times, like 3 honest, sincere attempts. And that's one of the things that TCEQ verifies before they certify this, because that's law. So you guys probably won't get another one. You might, but you won't necessarily get another one because hopefully we have documentation through the return receipt that you were successfully notified the first time.
Okay. Okay. Yes, sir. Do you have
But I'll say, we never got the first one as the tenant. I know we're not a property owner or putting a well in, but as the tenant on the property, I got this letter a couple days ago from actually District 1 Chief of Staff, forwarded it over to me just as an FYI. How do we get on the distribution list for this moving forward? As the only people on the
You
actual-
signed in, so.
This will take care of us
Yes,
now.
yes.
Okay, good.
You'll be notified of upcoming meetings.
We're
and
good.
then
Okay.
We'll give you any information if you want to continue following the MSD application. I just did want to point out right there, I know in the public hearing that was a mistake. It's going to be during the city council in December 2021. But like I said, the next step is the community health, environment, and culture committee. And so that'll be another opportunity for y'all to provide comments. So if no one else has any questions, thank you so much. It was glad that we had an audience and very good questions. And